It was one of those rare dawns when even the silence sounded special. Everything seemed unrealistically calm. He woke early, before the first rays of sunlight had penetrated the heavy curtains of her bedroom. The world, which usually greeted him with the clatter of giants' footsteps and the inexorable struggle for survival, was frozen at this moment. Only the steady, warm breath of his beloved filled the space above him like a breeze covering an entire valley. He lay on a vast blanket plateau. The sheet beneath him seemed more than just a fabric. It was a whole country spread out for miles. The folds formed soft ridges that ran off into the distance, lost in the shadows. Somewhere out there rose the wall of her body, gigantic and yet native. The only place in this world where he felt truly protected. Through the ajar curtains, the sun slowly filled the room. The rays slid across her face, illuminating every familiar feature. Her eyelashes cast long shadows like forests of curved trees, and her lips, ajar in sleep, seemed like majestic arches leading into the mysterious world of her dreams. He stood up and moved forward cautiously, feeling the fabric spring slightly beneath his feet with each step, traversing the folds of the blanket like a traveler climbing the morning hills. Each fold greeted him like a new slope, and even though he knew the way by heart, each time it seemed special. Just today, just now. And then he saw her palm. It lay right in front of him, majestic, like an ancient plane spread out in the morning light. Her fingers were slightly bent, relaxed in the tranquility of sleep. The wreaths beneath her thin skin formed barely visible rivers of blue, and every line on her palm seemed like an ancient road that caravans of time might travel. He slowly stepped closer, knelt at the base of her index finger, and pressed his whole body against it. The warmth of her skin filled him from the inside out, as if he was at a living source of life. Her breathing changed. She must have been dreaming something. A warm wave of air swept over him, ruffling his hair like a light wind before a thunderstorm, but then it subsided again. He slowly lay right in her palm, nestled between the lines of her life and destiny. I wonder, he thought, if she knows that right now in those lines literally lies his own destiny. Here, in this morning peace, there were no offices, no boss with her icy stare, no cruel world where he was nothing but a mockery. There was only her breath, her warmth, her hand, a world where he was not small, not a stranger, but needed and loved. He looked up into her face. It rose high like the peaks of heaven. Her eyelashes twitched slightly with every breath she took. Her lips parted slightly and then closed again in a faint smile, as if her dreams were good and bright. He allowed himself to close his eyes. Let the morning last forever. Let this moment stay with him until the evening. He knew he had a brutal day ahead of him, another struggle to find his place in an alien world. But as long as he lay here, in her palm, he could allow himself to be just a man, albeit a tiny one, but still a man. When she woke up, he was already far away. Not because he didn't want to stay, but because he knew that she was beginning a normal day. And he was beginning a journey through chaos and danger into a world that was far less kind to him. The road to the office for him began long before dawn. From the bedroom, he climbed down the massive legs of the bed like fortress towers, carefully running his hands over the unevenness of the wood. Every time she got up and walked past, the floor shuddered under her light footsteps, and to him they were seismic tremors. The corridor stretched endlessly. The floor was covered with smooth parquet boards, with gaping cracks between them, which to him were like crevices in a rocky mountain. Sometimes gusts of cool air from the lower floors of the building would rise from these cracks, and one had to press himself against the floor to avoid being swept away by this icy breath of the giant house. The elevator was an unattainable luxury. For him, the elevator doors closed faster than he could traverse even a fifth of this gigantic space. He'd once tried to use the ventilation shaft to get to the top, but after hours of climbing the slippery metal surfaces and 2 falls down, he'd given up on repeating the experience. Now he moved through the maze of technical passageways, using the abandoned spaces between walls, jumping over cables like tight ropes, and climbing over textured wallpaper like steep cliffs. When he finally reached the office, he was greeted by a vast world full of movement, sounds, and vibrations. People scurried back and forth, their every step shaking the floor like the blows of a thunder god. The giant shadows of their movements fell on him like clouds over the desert. To most of them, he was invisible, and those who knew of his existence looked at him as if he were an outlandish toy, the sort of amusing trinket to be shown off at a party but not to be taken seriously. And so he stood again at the gateway to his own personal hell, the door to his boss's office. She was the female ruler of this world, tall, cold, with a perfectly ironed suit and a piercing gaze that seemed heavier than any physical pressure. She didn't just run the office. She ruled the entire space around her, as if reality itself was obeying her orders. He stood on the massive desk, as if on a huge stage, where he was playing a role that had long since bored both the audience and the director. "You've ruined everything again." Her voice cut through the space like a thunderclap. Her finger, perfectly manicured, with a long, sharp nail, came down in front of him, making the tables shudder. "Do you realize how much you're worth to this company? Exactly how much your puny stature weighs?" Her face came closer, gigantic and implacable. He stood with his head down, knowing it was pointless to even shout back. His voice, even if he screamed with all his might, would have sounded like a slight squeak to her at best. His thoughts were racing. He remembered dragging the report behind him that morning, a huge stack of papers, each weighing almost as much as he did. How long it had taken him to wade through the maze of employees' feet, almost getting caught under the heavy heel of another female coworker rushing to the coffee machine. He knew that no matter how much effort he made, in her eyes he was still just a curio, a toy someone had left on that desk too long. "You can't even handle the reports," she added, leaning back in her chair and looking down at him as if he were a tiny speck of dust that had accidentally lingered on the perfectly polished desk. He realized he would never have another place in this office. His existence here was not a job, but a constant reminder to himself of his own insignificance. And yet he stood, didn't fall to his knees, didn't beg, didn't try to explain himself. In this silence, amid the rumble of footsteps and her icy voice, he retained the last shred of dignity. He stood upright, albeit small, until the end. When the workday came to an end, he seemed to have lost everything: strength, self-respect, even the desire to feel anything. His chest felt empty, like a dried-up well. He didn't want to go home in such a state. He knew that if he found himself in that very room, even next to his beloved, his longing would overwhelm him, and it would be much harder to get out of this darkness. So he went to the place where the noise and chaos could at least temporarily dull his inner pain: a nightclub. This place had always evoked two feelings in him. On the one hand, the music, lights, and laughter distracted him from his thoughts. On the other hand, every visit turned into a deadly adventure. His way through the hall was like the maneuvers of a survivor in a world of giant machines. The dancing girls and boys moved without noticing him, their footsteps rattling like hammer blows on a stone square. The flashes of strobe lights were blinding, and the powerful bass echoed inside his tiny body with a deafening vibration. Giant heels with crystal gleam sank to the floor with such power that each impact was thunderous in his ears. He was walking like he was walking through a minefield. And then she appeared. Tall, gorgeous, self-confident. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and the predatory fire he knew slid into her smile. She noticed him at once. Her gaze burned, like a spotlight picking out a target from total darkness. "Now that's interesting," she exclaimed, and without wasting a second, she put her palm down on him. He tried to escape, but her fingers closed around him with carefree ease. He was held captive in her hand, a large, warm, perfume-scented hand that made him dizzy. She lifted him high, showing him off to her friends, who immediately ran closer. "Look who I found, a real baby," she laughed, smiling broadly. Her face was very close. Her lips were like walls, and her eyes were two bottomless abysses of mirth mixed with the pure pleasure of his helplessness. "Well, will you show us what you can do?" With that phrase, she tilted her palm, and he almost rolled down, struggling to keep his balance on the smooth skin of her palm. "Look, he's afraid to fall," one of her friends laughed, and the laughter of the giants came crashing down on his ears. Her fingers, as if by some unknown force, gently nudged him in the back. "Come on, march," came the order, full of playful cruelty. His feet, treacherously trembling, began to take tiny steps on her palm. He could feel the laughter of the giants echoing around him as each step he took caused a new burst of merriment. "And now a bow!" The voice came again, and the huge finger gave him another gentle nudge, forcing him to bend down. Humiliation clutched his heart with an iron vice. He realized that for them it was a joke, an innocent game they wouldn't even remember tomorrow. For him, it was another crack in his fragile self-esteem. "I wonder how you sing," one of the girls suddenly suggested. "Or maybe you could tell us something funny." He stood there, unable to utter a word. His throat was dry, his voice trembled, and his eyes, full of tears, looked away from those huge, laughing faces. But the taunting didn't end there. She brought him right up to her face, her huge lips slightly open, and he felt her hot breath, soaked in sweet alcoholic vapors. "You're so tiny," she whispered, her lips so close he could feel their movement shaking the air. "And so funny." Her tongue showed from behind her lips for a moment, and laughing, she licked them as if pondering something. This movement caused a new explosion of laughter among the friends. He stood frozen in utter despair. Never had he felt so insignificant, so helpless. At last, she was bored with the game. "He's had enough," she said with a lazy smile and unclenched her fingers. He collapsed on the soft velvet couch, breathing heavily, trying to calm his racing heart. They had already forgotten about him, turning their attention to other distractions. And he was left lying there, a small man in a vast world where his suffering was just a backdrop for someone else's fun. When he finally found the strength to get up and make his way home, night had already settled tightly over the city. It was quiet at home. She was asleep. Her face seemed infinitely peaceful, her breathing the most beautiful sound one could hear after that horror. He climbed up on the bed, slowly working his way through the folds of the blanket, and settled right next to her palm. He wrapped his arms around her finger, pressed his whole body against it, and closed his eyes. Only here did he feel alive again. Only here did his humiliation and pain recede before the simple human feeling of being close to someone who truly loved you. He knew it would happen again tomorrow. But now was the night. And for the sake of this night, it was worth living.